All right, diving into our second game of today, we have Hikaru Nakamura versus Magnus Carlsen. These two have a very long-standing rivalry. This game did take place in the Title Tuesday tournament, which took place today, and this game features a very aggressive line of the Marshall attack, a very unusual line, not drawish at all. It's going to be a good game. Stick around. Let's dive right in. All right, in the game, Hikaru opens 1 e4, best by test. Magnus goes e5. Then we have knight to f3, knight c6, and the good old-fashioned Ruy Lopez opening is the weapon of choice. And now from here, Magnus does go for the Marshall attack. We're going to speed through these moves. a6, bishop a4, knight f6, short castles, very standard stuff. Here the open Ruy Lopez is knight takes e4. The molar is bishop c5, but instead bishop e7 played in this game, heading for the Marshall. Now here the two main moves for white include d3 and rook to e1. In this game, Hikaru does go rook to e1. Now we have b5, bishop b3, and finally the key Marshall attack move is simply short castle. And so far, both sides have wasted literally 1 second left on the clock to get here. They started with 3 minutes. They have 2 minutes, 59 seconds each, both sides blitzing out their moves so far. Now here, white has a very large number of anti-Marshall lines he can play. For example, a4, a3, d3, h3, and so on are all very playable here for white. Instead, in the game though, white does go c3, allowing d5, allowing black to get his Marshall attack just as he wants. And here Magnus goes straight for it. d5 is the move, the key Marshall attack idea. The point being, you are giving up that pawn on the e5 square, as we're going to see. Now here we have e takes d5, then knight takes d5, then knight takes, and finally rook takes e5. And here white is officially up a single pawn, that being the pawn on e5. He now has the extra pawn on the d file, and it's going to be a race between black trying to attack white on the king side and white trying to unwind and develop his queen side without getting checkmated. Now here, of course, the main line for black is c6, supporting knight on d5, then white goes d3 or d4, and black typically goes bishop d6, followed by queen to h4, targeting the weak pawn on h2. Now, instead of all this, in the game, Magnus, he plays a very, very strange, very unusual move, and as we can see, he is wasting quite a few seconds on this move right here. He goes bishop b7. What is the idea? Well, you support the knight on d5 with the bishop, but overall, this bishop needs to be on this diagonal if black wants to get a vicious attack going against the white king. Instead, on b7, it's a little bit more awkwardly placed, and it's going to be harder for black to attack the white king. So what is the idea here? Well, Magnus, I think he's trying to throw Hikaru off his game and throw him a curveball in this blitz game. All right, Hikaru continues. d4, very logical, gaining space in the center of the board. Now black, bishop f6, pressuring the rook on e5 and forcing it back. Now we have rook to e1, the rook retreats, and now black goes rook to e8, challenging the white rook on the e1 square. Now we have a trade of rooks. Rook takes e8, and then queen takes e8. Both sides blitzing out their moves pretty fast so far, but I do want to point out, Hikaru Nakamura, he's only got 2 minutes and 17 seconds left on the clock so far. That twist idea, bishop b7 instead of c6, is paying off for Magnus. He is getting a lead on the clock so far. All right, now it turns out the strongest move here for white is going to be queen to f1, sliding the queen over. The point being the queen does defend the king side very, very well. Instead, in the game, bishop takes d5 was chosen, giving up the bishop for that knight on d5. But that bishop, that light squared bishop, is just so important for white's position. And here black already is starting to take over in this game, despite being a pawn down. We have bishop takes d5, and now look at the difference in the quality of these pieces. Black obviously has that bishop pair, but beyond that, these two Bs are very, very active in the center of the board. The queen controls the e file, and all of white's pieces are still on their original squares, except for the king on g1. All right, white tries to unwind. Knight d2 is the move for Hikaru, a solid choice. And here the best move for black, believe it or not, is c5, giving up a second pawn temporarily. Instead, in the game, b4 was chosen, trying to soften up that queen side, and here Hikaru finds the key idea, c4, gaining space. The point being that pawn on b5 is no longer there. It no longer controls c4, and therefore c4 is an excellent move for white, driving back that very strong bishop on d5. Now black goes bishop e6, retreating his bishop. White goes d5, gaining more space in the center of the board, driving it back yet again, and now black goes bishop f5. Now we have knight f1. The point being the knight is likely heading to the e3 square, where it does clog up the e-file and pressure the weak bishop on f5. Now here, black is not waiting around. He goes queen to e4, flying in with the queen and pressuring the center of the board. Now white goes knight g3 instead of knight to e3. The point being, with that queen on the e4 square, when you go knight g3, you do fork both the queen and the bishop. That means the bishop is going to come off the board one way or another. Now here, black goes queen d3, offering the queen trade, and very interestingly, Hikaru, he doesn't trade immediately. Instead, he actually goes queen to b3, giving black the choice to trade on b3, but white will get the open a file. And I do want to point out, here in this position, you have no time for knight takes f5, as then black just takes the queen on d1, queen takes d1 would be the move, and black is simply winning on the spot. Instead, here, queen to b3 played in the game, and black does take the queen. We have queen takes b3, then a takes b3, winning back the queen, and now bishop to c2. That pawn on c2 is as good as gone, as the only way to defend it would be rook to a3, but that move loses the rook on the spot to b takes a3. Therefore, that pawn on on b3 will be lost. All right, now we have knight h5, jumping up with the knight. Bishop d4 is the move in response, and now bishop e3, offering the bishop trade, and Magnus does go for it. We have bishop takes, then f takes, then bishop takes b3, and black has officially equalized the game in terms of material. Both sides now have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 pawns, and I gotta say, these pawns on c4 and d5 are looking very, very weak to me. Here, white goes rook c1, trying to defend the pawn on c4, but Magnus is not done. He goes a5, advancing his queenside pawn majority. Of course, his idea is a4, then a3, trying to get a past alpha 0 a pawn on the a file. Now here, white, the strongest move, it turns out, is knight to g3. This move is very tricky, but you have to play it. Here is the main line. White goes knight g3, black goes a4, then you go knight to e4, and from e4, the knight has access to the d2 square. That is the key idea behind knight g3. Instead, in the game, white actually goes knight to f4, and from f4, that knight is never going to have access to d2. It's 4 moves away from that square, and this is going to spell a lot of trouble for white in this game. All right, black continues. a4, gaining space on the queen side. The threat, of course, is simply a3, trying to get a pass pawn on that a file. Now we have knight d3, the knight drops back, and finally a3, then b takes and b takes. Now black officially has the pass pawn on the a file. However, white also has good chances to make a pass pawn in the center of the board in the future with ideas like c5 and then d6. Therefore, if white can defend, he may be doing okay, but for now, that pass pawn on a3 is very, very dangerous. White continues, knight c5, jumping up with the knight. Black goes rook to b8, trying to defend the bishop on the b3 square. Now here, in this position, white's got to find the key idea, king to f2. That is the best way to stay in the game. Instead, white here goes rook to a1, trying to blockade that pawn on a3. However, this move has a serious tactical flaw, as you can see by the eval bar literally collapsing on the left side of your screen. Now, if you like puzzles, pause the video right now and try to find the unbelievable tactical idea for black in this position. This move is a double exclamation point move. It is a total and complete shocker. That is a one hint for you. All right, the key idea here for black, believe it or not, is bishop to a2. What is the idea? This is a clean sacrifice of the bishop. The point being, though, you're threatening rook to b1, trading off those rooks after rook takes, then bishop takes, and from there, this pawn would have a very easy time advancing. And if you take the bishop, here is the key idea. If you take it, you go rook b1, king f2 is forced, then you go rook b2, forking the king on f2 and the rook on a2. And if you take the rook after rook takes a takes, this pawn is going to promote. There is nothing you can do to stop it. That is the reason why bishop a2 all the way back in this position is so strong. You force off the rooks, and this pawn will promote one way or the other. Instead, in the game, bishop takes c4 was chosen by Magnus, and he had a lot of time to make this move. He had 1 minute and 18 seconds left, and he didn't find the idea of bishop to a2, and that may have cost him the victory in this game, because here white simply goes rook takes a3, winning that pass pawn on the a file, and now we have something pretty close to a level game. Of course, there's a lot to play for in this endgame. Let's see who comes out on top. All right, black continues. Bishop takes d5, winning yet another pawn. He's officially up a pawn in the endgame. White goes e4, driving back that bishop. Then we have bishop to c6, rook to a7, pressuring the weak pawn on c7, and then rook to c8 does defend. Now we have knight to a6, jumping up with the knight. The rook and the knight now pressure that pawn on c7. Black goes bishop takes e4, winning yet another pawn, but giving up that pawn on c7 in the process. Now we have rook takes c7, and then rook to a8. Very interesting. Black keeping the rooks on the board. Magnus Carlsen here, he is playing for a win, and he knows with those rooks on the board, his winning chances will be a little bit higher, especially considering white is down on the clock. He only has 30 seconds left versus the 1 minute and 2 second of Magnus Carlsen. All right, now knight c5 is the move, dropping back with the knight and pressuring the weak bishop on e4. Then we have bishop f5, knight to b3, and then g6. Now we have rook c1, white dropping back with the rook, protecting the first rank. And now we have king g7, then rook e1, rook d8, king f2, and then g5, gaining space. Now rook to e2, king to f6. Magnus slowly but surely improving the placement of his pieces. He is clearly playing for a win here. All right, rook d2 is the move, offering the rook trade. And once again, Magnus does decline. Rook b8 is the move, pressuring the knight on the b3 square. Then knight d4. Then we have bishop to e4, rook to e2, bishop d5, rook d2, rook to a8, knight to c6. Of course, that knight cannot be taken. I mean, you can take it, but after bishop takes and then rook d6, you win back the piece immediately. So Magnus here, not falling for that trick. After knight c6, he does go bishop to e6, keeping those minor pieces alive for now. Then we have knight d4, dropping back with the knight, pressuring the bishop once again. Then h5, gaining space. And then we have knight takes e6, and then f takes e6. Very interesting. Magnus recapturing with the pawn instead of the king. Perhaps he thinks his winning chances are a little bit higher here. All right, white continues. Rook b2, then king to f5, h3, and then h4, locking down those pawns on the king's side. Then rook b3, then rook to a2, hits the king, king to f3, and then e5, gaining space in the center yet again. And now here, the key move for white to stay in the game is g4, gaining space, and even if black does take en passant, you are doing just fine after king takes. Instead, in the game, rook to b4 was chosen, and this move turns out to be a fatal mistake. Black goes rook to a3, hitting the king on the f3 square, then king to f2, and then e4, gaining even more space. Now we have rook b8, flying back with the rook, rook to a2, king to e3, rook a3, king f2, and here, the key idea for black is simply rook a2 once again, and black should be able to break through. For example, rook a2, king g1, king f4, the king's coming to e3, and so on. But instead, in this position, here black simply goes rook g3, and from here, Hikaru finds a way to hang on. He goes rook to f8, hitting the king, forcing king to e5, then rook e8, king d4, rook d8, king e5, and from here, both sides go for a draw by repetition. Of course, white is guarding the e3 square, therefore king to e3 is not possible, and black is going to be able to check the black king forever. We have rook e8, king f4, rook f8, then king to e5, then finally rook to e8 once again, and here both sides are forced to agree to a draw by a threefold repetition. Wow, what a game between Magnus and Hikaru in the Title Tuesday tournament on chess.com. But don't go anywhere. I've got yet another incredible game coming up for you right now. This one features Magnus Carlsen and Maxime Fashir-Lagrave from the same tournament, the Title Tuesday tournament in 2025.